The other one you mentioned, Admiral Gillespie, what is it? Gillespie Cavo Dragon, I believe, head of NATO's military committee. And
Yeah,
he was the one that told
Giuseppe.
financial
Yeah.
he's the one that told Financial Times that we need to do preemptive strikes for defensive reasons against Russia's hybrid war. That article was completely absurd. Politico did a secondary, like a follow up, and it was just a vehicle for empty quotes by all of these European leaders for things that
But
they
it shows
couldn't
you that
validate.
their mentality, though. They're just
Yeah,
not. I mean, they're not in a end the conflict terms. They're in a desperation and escalate the conflict terms. Again, they're living in a fantasy world. They can't accept the way things have turned out. And that is a very dangerous position. The entire way that they understand the world and their place in it, according to the supremacist messianic ideology of Western exceptionalism, is challenged by what has happened. And they can't accept that. It challenges their very identity, who they believe they are, and their place in the world. They cannot accept it, which is it's a very dangerous position because both sides ultimately, right, even if the weapons are mostly in the US hands, are the nuclear powered superpowers of the world. And
right.
any direct conflict, right? I mean, let's face it, the West, NATO, and Russia have been in conflict for at least the last 4 years, but it has still been a conflict largely conducted through in the shadows, right, as it were, at least where it's not openly recognized, and most of the West's power has been through the thin proxy of Kiev. But
Hmm.
the U.S. and the U.K. and France have openly fired with their own personnel, invariably fired ballistic missiles into Russia. It's just I don't I don't see this. I don't
Indeed.
see
Well,
how this ends diplomatically. I don't see how this ends diplomatically, which means I don't see how it ends in the long. We can talk about conflict petering off. We can talk about frozen conflict. We can talk about guerrilla conflict and dirty war at the end of it. But as I said in February of 2022, this is a forever war. And I do not expect that Ukraine will truly know peace, that there will be conflict of some kind. The absolute best we could hope for is a renewed cold come hot war with Europe coming out of this. Russia hoped when they began this conflict that the Europeans and the Americans would come to their senses and some type of new Cold War style peace agreement for security, some type of, adults in the room coming to the fore to out of self-preservation and mutually assured destruction, if nothing else, come to terms with Russia, and that some level of normalization and resumption of economic activity would return, right? Some level of return to normal. That's
yeah.
never going to happen. Never going to happen. It's just,
Um,
you would need a complete change in the political ideologies and institutions of both Europe and the United States. And that's not anywhere in the cards.
well, there's also the problem of what does NATO mean if
Yeah.
the major conflict that it gets involved in, it just fundamentally loses. Like it
Yeah.
challenges the identity of the organization
Yeah, it
itself. It
does.
challenges
It
our
challenges
purpose.
it challenges US-led Western global hegemony. And that was said
Yeah.
openly by Boris Johnson, who said that hegemony is at risk. In many other terms by Mark Milley and others, it has been framed in slightly more, politically ameliorative terms like US global leadership is on the line. But they
Mhm.
see that rightly, this is a world order shaping conflict. If US and NATO lose this or are perceived as losing this, then that will call their hegemonic power into question, because ultimately hegemony at some level is about fear and belief, right? It is to some degree, there has to be hard power aspects, right? There has to be soft power aspects, but ultimately it's narrative, right? That
Power
is
is the
the
shadow on the
glue that
wall.
ties it all together. And if people
Yeah.
saw Russia effectively, after they declared that NATO must win this war against Russia very loudly from the roof, and they don't, and Russia is perceived as winning, right? Then the whole rotten edifice, and how will you convince? And they talk all the time, oh, it will embolden China to retake their own island province of Taiwan from Western-backed separatists. But how the media has to spin the whole situation around Taiwan a certain way. So, but to a degree, they're right. I mean, not that China would be emboldened one way or another, but ultimately, yes, hegemony will be called into question, not just by China, but by countries around the world. And already, the U.S. has failed to corral the rest of the world to follow their existential economic war of sanctions against Russia. Outside the West, the rest of the world refused, right? They either outright said no, or they and then found workarounds and continued trade with Russia anyway, which is, like where India's at. China says no, right? India says, what'd you say? Middleman. Russian oil flow continues, right? That's where the whole world is at, right? And that is already world order changing, right? The hegemon has failed, right? That old line, my favorite line from Star Wars: A New Hope, the first Star Wars movie, where Princess Leia tells Grand Moff Tarkin, the more you try to tighten your grip, the more star systems will slip through your fingers, something along those lines. And that's what's happening here. So Russia has already won the diplomatic war.
I like the Game of Thrones.
They're winning the economic and military war, but they've already won the diplomatic war.
Power is a shadow on the wall. And this idea that, power is where people think power resides. And if that ever gets challenged.
You're both quoting their ancient Greek political philosophers and George R.R. Martin.
Yeah, right. I just love that line. Power is a shadow on the wall. I love that line.
Well, that's back to the ancient Greek philosophers. The power believes it resides where men believes it resides. Was that Varys in the Game of Thrones?
Yes. Yep. Yeah, Varys. Yeah. I love that character.
It's a realist truism, right? It is.
Yeah.
It is.
It's very true. Until it's challenged, it's where people think it is, right? One of the other things, the tankers.
If you want to think of it in those terms, the conflict right now, the geopolitical conflict, you could say it's a Game of Thrones. Not that Russia can hope to take the throne, but they can hope to place China on it and themselves as the hand, if you want to look at it in those terms,
hand of the king,
rather than the US.
Thing. The tankers that have been hit is fascinating to me. Now, these weren't Russian ships. Kazakhstan is
Gambian flagged owned ships.
Exactly. And so Ukraine has decided to bomb tankers from effectively other countries under the idea of gaining some kind of leverage because they've lost the war on the ground. This seems insane to me.
Desperation and spite. Not only have they lost the world in the ground, but it's also a recognition that their plan, backed by the U.S., as the New York Times has admitted, of a long-range drone strike campaign to destroy Russia's oil refining capacity has also failed, right?
Yeah.
So now they're moving to something new, a new escalation. They're going after the quote-unquote shadow fleet, right? And once again, the shadow fleet isn't some, I don't know, Babylon 5, sci-fi, whatever, right? I always love the terminology. It's absolutely hilarious. As soon as anyone in the Western media utters the word shadow fleet, with anything other than risible, scare quotations around it, they're a complete propagandist, right? I mean, there's just no question. But
It's such
it is though. There's only a minority of ships, right? I mean, more than before the conflict, but there's only a minority of ships that are Russian-owned, Russian-flagged ships. It's just the world's maritime oil shipping industry that is not directly insuranced anymore by London, and so outside of their direct control, and they see money to be made. That's all what it is. It's money to be made. They have ships. Russia has oil that needs shipped somewhere. Someone wants that oil. They see money to be made, right? And that's why they come. That's why these Gambian flag tankers are there. That is the world energy market defying, U.S., but there's no specific sanctions again. They try to pinpoint individual ships, which is whack-a-mole. They just changed the name of the ships and the flag, the flag of, of convenience that it's flown under and whatever. But, people are going to make money. Capitalists be capitalists.
Right.
But we've been through conflict in the Black Sea before, which I have regarded as fairly inconclusive. We've had two versions of grain deals, right, which are about Black Sea shipping that have gone down, and there was still effectively a tacit agreement that shipping on both sides remains untouched, right? Even Russia hasn't targeted the obvious NATO shipping of arms and supplies coming up through the Turkish-controlled Dardanelles, up the coast of Romania and Bulgaria, and then sneaking around into Odessa and ports there on the Dnieper. They may hit them in port. They've hit the ports repeatedly, right? But they largely didn't interfere with the shipping. There are diplomatic reasons for that, as well as there are practical military reasons for that, right? But this is a new escalation because two, again, Gambian flag tankers, right, operating as part of the Shadow Fleet without being owned by Russia, if you want to call it that way. They were on their way from Turkish waters to Novorossiysk, to the Russian port there. They were not carrying oil at the time they were hit, right? Which, okay, so the environmental, it's not an absolute catastrophe, the way it could have been otherwise. But, who knows what's going to happen in the future. But they were hit by these unmanned USVs, unmanned surface vehicles. The Kiev regime put out videos of them using these vehicles to hit the tankers. So there's no question about what happened. Or who was responsible. But these two ships at least were damaged. And there is a third ship, a Turkish flagged ship that has carried Russian oil before, may have been carrying it at the time, that is now sinking off the coast of Senegal. That may also, maybe they had a magnetic mine attached. We don't know what the exact situation is. But two, possibly even three ships targeted now. On top of that, they hit the energy facilities at the port of Novorossiysk that were owned by the Caspian Sea Pipeline Consortium, of which that's the majority of oil that flows through that is actually from Kazakhstan.
Right.
And Kazakhstan has decidedly stayed neutral, more or less, in the same way, that other countries have. They still continue trade with Russia, despite Western demands to do otherwise. But they also trade with Ukraine, and they don't actively participate on Russia's side in this, or the Kiev regime's side. But this is definitely an attack on them. 20% of their oil exports went through this pipeline, and I have not seen any definitive assessment of the damage. I saw initial reports that said, quote, damage beyond repair, but I haven't seen anything definitive after that. So that's not confirmed.
Don't quote you on that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you can quote whoever was quoted on that, but that doesn't mean that it's true, right? You know,
Right.
we need some satellite and other assessment and other things. But here's the thing: the Caspian Sea Pipeline Consortium. Yes, some Russian energy companies are invested to a certain amount in that, and some Russian energy does go through those pipelines. But the U.S. energy majors are also heavily invested in the Caspian Sea Pipeline Consortium. So that is an effective strike against the United States. Now, pure speculation on my part, but let's say Zelensky, other figures in Kiev, a little peeved at the U.S. pushing them, trying to push them towards diplomacy, taking Yermak's head, decide to lash out and hit a pipeline that is in part owned by American energy interests. Possibility. All I'm saying, I certainly believe the Kiev regime is capable of that type of stupid, spiteful act. They can't but know that the U.S.'s energy companies are heavily in. I mean, that's not something that can be denied, and they chose to hit it anyway. At this point in time, you do the logic chains as you said. Speculation, no evidence yet, but I mean, what kind of evidence would there be of that unless someone opened their mouth? So anyway, it's a huge new escalation. Obviously, shipping costs for Russian energy are going to go up, right? Insurance is going to go up, whether it's Russian insurance or Arab insurance or, Southeast Asian insurance, right? Ship captains are not going to want to put their ships at risk if these types of attacks continue, right? So there will be fewer ships willing to participate in this shadow fleet trade, right? So it's going to create problems for Russia. There's no question about that. Is it a problem that is going to be, it'll bring Russia to their knees? No, right? At the very worst, they'll redirect their energy as much as possible out of the Black Sea. Now, Russia does have other options. One, they could convoy energy tankers moving through the Black Sea, as they have threatened to do and did at least once in the Baltic. Problems with that is the Kiev regime still has a regular amount of NATO supplied unmanned surface vehicles, and that then puts their Navy ships at risk. And the Russian Black Sea fleet has effectively been sidelined in this conflict, right? The Russia just sees no reason to put them to sea when they're not going to attempt to shut down the Black Sea trade. And defenses against unmanned surface vehicles, these drone boats, suicide boats, are not guaranteed. And Russia has lost, or at least had damaged, some very expensive ships for not a good exchange, right? If we're talking, cost-effective war of attrition, type math. So that would be, once again, putting some of their surface ships at risk, escorting ships. And that may be part of the reason, to lure them out of the ports in the eastern Black Sea at Novorossiysk back to where they could be targeted more regularly again. That may be at least part of the logic behind this. Now, Russia has other military options. They can shut trade down to Ukrainian ports. All they have to do is flood Odessa with sea mines. They can do that.
Why don't they do that? I mean, as a response.
Because of the diplomatic, the global South, with the grain deals and everything, countries in Africa, right? Even if the grain that Russia, the Kiev regime, that Ukraine provides to the global energy markets is, a fraction, a fourth or a fifth or whatever of what Russia provides. It's still important for the global food markets. It would raise costs for everything. And all of the African countries, they live, not all of them, but a lot of them still have, are constantly dealing with the threat of overpopulation and malnutrition and not enough economy. So in order to keep the rest of the world on side, or at least on the sides of this conflict, Russia agreed not to inhibit the Kiev regime's grain trade through the Black Sea by such easy methods as sea mines, which they could do very quickly if they wanted to. And I don't believe they're going to do that again now. Maybe if things escalate further, it becomes irregular, that argument will come more to the fore. Right now, Russia's going to probably do nothing. I mean, they'll launch probably some drone and missile strikes against Odessa, they say, where these unmanned surface vehicles could have been launched from. And maybe they could. They hunt them, regularly whenever they could find them. I'm sure the British Navy, officers were involved in this because they've been involved in planning everything. They imagine some type of Crimean war. They seem to think, if you read the British reports, gloating and glowing about the role they've played in the defeat of Russia on the Black Sea, which is way overblown. At best, it's been inconclusive. But you can bet that they are involved in this. That is a certainty as far as I'm concerned. I don't even think it's a matter of speculation. They've been involved in planning and directing everything that has happened on the Black Sea up until now, and openly admitted it. I see no reason why that would have changed. So they're definitely involved in all of this. But at this point, Russia is going to very much limit their response. Again, missile and drone strikes in Odessa on the coast there, hitting maybe some NATO people, some places. But the problem is these boats can be launched from, just about anywhere. It's difficult, but it will require. This would have to become, systematic. It would have to become a regular part of the conflict, and the costs would have to rack up, both in perception terms and economic terms, for Russia to take more decisive action than that. And because it would be damaging to them, again, on diplomatic grounds, on military grounds, a whole host of things. Russia's winning the conflict on the ground, and ultimately this conflict will be decided on the ground. They consider the Black Sea a sideshow. They don't want to risk their navy any further to be damaged and taken out by unmanned surface. And what do they hit back? Because the Kiev regime doesn't have a navy. So it's kind of lopsided. It's just the realities of modern drone warfare that, in a tight, lined by coasts, bodies of the Black Sea, rather than big blue water space, it's a whole new type of naval warfare happening here. And it's not worth the risks of putting their navy at risk to fight a war that they can. What do they hit back? It's nothing but shadows and drones on the other side. It's kind of
it's not equal in that sense.
If you want to consider that a Kiev regime victory, sure. I mean, you can if you want to call it that. It's not going to decide the conflict, and Russia will attempt to sideline this whole thing and kind of just hope it goes away.
Last question before I let you go. We have about 4 minutes. Venezuela. One of the Russian leaders, God, I can't think of his name. He said this almost like a month ago, and I need to find the quote. But he pointed out, he says, look, we need to stand by our allies. And he was somewhat aggressive on this idea that Russia should assist Venezuela. Do you see that happening, or not so much?
No.
I mean, there's an argument that's being made that part of the reason that they're going after Venezuela is to go after Cuba. And there's a question of whether or not Russia would also stand by Cuba in the situation, or whether they would just let both fall by the wayside.
So, I mean, obviously there's going to be greater pressure if after Venezuela it comes to Cuba. But for right now, Russia and China aren't going to do much. No matter how much people want to scream in the comments that Russia and China have the ability to stop the U.S. on the other side of the Western Hemisphere from overthrowing a militarily weak, government sitting on top of the world's largest proven energy reserves. They don't have the ability to arm that. Now, they could go to a brink of nuclear confrontation by putting missiles or Oreshniks there that they would have to fire because the Venezuelans couldn't fire them. And then we'd be back in a Cuban Missile Crisis scenario on top of everything else. But Russia is not willing to go there at this point, not for Venezuela. They don't like what's going on. They may provide some degree of assistance, but ultimately, whatever they and the Chinese can provide will be much smaller than people would hope it would be, in the alt media fandom. And it will only be about raising costs to the U.S. That's all they can effectively do. Ultimately, the U.S. will attempt to win this not with a military invasion, but with the CIA and supporting the opposition in Venezuela. They will attempt to co-opt and bribe and blackmail the Venezuelan military and political leadership, as they did in Syria, right? As they did in Iraq and Libya, as they tried to do with only limited success in Iran. But ultimately, I found this statistic: the maximum pay of a Venezuelan soldier is $100 a month, which is 1/5 of what is considered for the minimum living standard, 1/5 of what a family of 4 needs in Venezuela. So that is the Syrian scenario all over again. And no matter how much people want to believe that the Venezuelan military will stand by the socialist principles, the Bolivarian revolution, I'm a cynic, and I might wish and that it might be otherwise, but CIA is very good at this type of thing.
Yeah.
So all that's left then is those who would resist, and some type of guerrilla, conflict, some type of unconventional conflict to raise the costs to make Venezuela ungovernable. That's really, of course, what Trump would be concerned about, energy costs rising and that sort of thing. But I don't know. That's very hard to predict, how that would turn around. But can the U.S. regime change Maduro, right, with decapitation strikes and this type of CIA operation? Yeah. I mean, that's pretty much guaranteed. Now, the word out from CNN in the last few hours was that in the Trump-Maduro phone call that did not go well, according to Western mainstream media, Maduro offered to step down in 18 months. Which
Trump said no.
Trump said no, you go now.
Trump said no. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would not, if at the end of the day, Maduro is placed with putting his country through an invasion and possible civil war, or stepping down himself and cutting some type of deal with the U.S., it is not completely unbelievable that at some point not to put his own country through that he would agree to. He might, especially if he was able to pick his successor, right? Because a large part of it is going to be about perception, right? Donald Trump needs a win. He needs a victory. He needs Maduro to go. That is the most important thing to him. The oil and everything else is a nice icing on the cake, but maybe that can be massaged afterward. So, but
Mark Sleboda.
Not a good situation for Venezuela.
No, that is just outrageous.
Ultimately, there's someone sitting in Langley saying, "Oh, you try to take our Kiev regime proxy from us. Oh, we're going to take Syria and Nepal and Venezuela off your side of the board." I'm sure of that.
Mark Sleboda, International Relations Security Analyst. You can follow Mark on Boosty under Real Politic with Mark Sleboda, or if you just put in his name, Mark Sleboda, both of those things will bring him up on Boosty. All of his interviews and everything else are there. Mark, you're fantastic. Great breakdown. The Venezuela thing is disturbing, to put it mildly. You have a fantastic day, man. Thank you for this. Be safe.
You as well. Cheers.
Bye-bye. All right. And I see my next guest is here. Fantastic breakdown by Mark, as